to meet the individual who is the point man for the completion and operation of the biosphere. I'll mention one other individual that they will meet ultimately. One of our colleagues is Dr. Wanda Matson. She's a double PhD, teaches at a university out west. Some years ago, she wrote a technical paper to NASA suggesting an experiment that they should run. And the personnel, I understand, said, why didn't we think of that? That's top flight. So they performed that experiment, and it turned out to be one of the most successful experiments. I do not know the name of the experiment. I will talk with Wanda ultimately and give you those details. It turned out to be one of the most successful experiments that NASA has performed to this date. This morning, we had in the audience an engineer who was part of the triumvirate that conceived, built, performed, and analyzed the first biological experiment that NASA ran in space. But back to this lady, Wanda Matson. She wrote this letter to NASA. They said, why didn't we think of this? Perform the experiment. They later selected her as an astronaut. She was in training, but they found that she had one kidney, and so she had to abort that program. Won't work in space, but they stayed in touch with her. Her IQ is 220. Now, 200 is the threshold, but she consistently scored in the range of 220, so they had to give it to her. By the way, when she wrote that letter to NASA, she was 10 years old. I'm simply telling you that to say that God has prepared individuals who have come on board at their own expense. They're not paid salaries, are providing a service that makes this possible. The gentleman I'm going to introduce with his dear wife, Bee, has moved to Glenrose. They're going to spend essentially the rest of their lives here. She's going to monitor the excavation site guests, and he's going to spend a lot of time here. This is Michael D. Herlacher. Headlines from the Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. These are the headlines. EMC Pro, Electromagnetic Communications Pro, wins NASA's Silver Snoopy for outstanding contributions in EMC verification. The Silver Snoopy Award is awarded to less than 1% of NASA employees. Only the very best who make major contributions that should be recognized. So that was the case, and according to their particular description, he was recognized for his exceptional contribution on the development of an automated testing and reporting process that significantly improved electromagnetic compatibility verification. Now that's amazing, because that is a foundation for him to help us complete and to operate the biosphere, which happens to have an electromagnetic field generator that simulates the energy both in Gauss level and in a Hertz vibratory cycle. Simulates what we had before the flood. Do you understand everything I've just said? This man is a gift from the Lord. He is now a vital part of our team. Would you welcome Michael D. Herlacher? Welcome home.
Good afternoon, visitors, those present and those online. He always gives such great intros, and I'm going to live up to those words someday as I find out more and more. So I've had a long life. Started in high school with electronic love, and they didn't have electronics schooling back then. So I went to the library and I studied up myself, and then I joined the Air Force, and hey, guess what? They had tech schools that taught electronics. So I went to school for about a year. That's 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, going to electronics school. So compare that to your college, and there's some degree worthiness of that in itself. Then I went out and I supported an Air Force career, 20 years before NASA. And at that time, I was supporting weapon systems and doing military things that one would question themselves, is this what the Lord would want anybody to do? Would they want somebody to make these weapons? Well, we need to protect ourselves to be able to think the way we do and to have places to go to do research. Otherwise, we're going to be told what to do all the time. This freedom that we have, that we bought with the military. So that was a basic, and then eventually I came back to the tech school area and I taught electronics for a number of years. So electronics is in my blood. Then I retired. Guess what? I went to NASA and I worked on electronic systems. And we worked in a lab, myself and my staff, where we did electromagnetic capability and compatibility testing. You may not know what that is, so I'll put it in terms of perspective you might know. You have several electronic devices in your house. You have vacuums, mixers that are motors. You have computers that are more electronic oriented, and your televisions and your radios. And when you turn all these things on, you're going to expect each one to perform their function. You don't want 3 of them working and then you turn on the 4th one and it upsets these guys over here and they don't work anymore. So for those of us that have been around before EMC came into vogue, that means when your mom or your dad turned on the vacuum to vacuum the house, all the radios got scrambled and they just sounded like a bunch of static and a bunch of noise. Well, that's interference. That's electrical interference. So putting that in terms of space, and at NASA, when you have a tin can in space, like the shuttle, tin can, I know it's more sophisticated than a tin can, but that's kind of what we called it, pressurized tin can where you put astronauts. A lot of different contractors will build equipment from different sources, and they all have a vital function inside these spacecraft, be it the space station or the shuttle or space lab. And when you turn one on, you're going to want the others to work. You don't want them to interfere with each other. So somebody that would build some equipment that was electromagnetic or electromechanically in its design, that had any components in its design, they would come to my lab and I would send them through a test. Tests last maybe from 3 days to 3 months, depending on size and complexity. And I put them through their paces. I had all this gear, call them amplifiers, generators, oscilloscopes, spectrum analyzers, probes, antennas, cabling, and computers, of course, that controlled the whole thing. And that's where my award was born, because they were basically in the Stone Age and did all this stuff manually and turned their knobs by themselves. And I brought to the table a little bit of automation. So we would test them and we'd give them a grade, whether they passed the EMC test. In other words, they didn't emit all this bad energy that might interfere with somebody else. But we also tested them, could they survive a hostile environment? So then I would give them a hostile environment. I would make radio waves, and I don't like to use this word in front of my customers, bombard them with radio waves to make sure they can tolerate it, that it can actually work in the environment that we were going to place them in. So that's what electromagnetic compatibility testing is. I did it for NASA, for the military. All your devices at home has a little sticker on it that the FCC puts on there that says, okay, these have been tested and they're not going to interfere, suitably not interfere. There's always levels of degree. So with that background and my love for electronics, it wasn't extremely aimed towards the Lord's work. And I always wanted to do the Lord's work more directly, maybe not being a missionary in Turkey or in South America. But if he called me to do that, I probably would do that, because he'll provide a way. So he called me down here through my wife knowing Dr. Baugh. Dr. Baugh said, oh, we need some more help to make this biosphere come online. So that's right up my alley. I'm an instrumentation person, a computer person. I program. We'll bring in the right equipment, and we will simulate, is that the right word, the pre-NOAA's flood environment, and hopefully the experiments that we put in there, which will be biological in nature, grasses and insects and fish. And I don't know what the biologists have in mind. My part of the job is to build and create and maintain that pre-NOAA's environment, and then hope our physicists and our biologists will have some very good results to report worldwide. So the Lord's called me here, and I'm glad you came here to listen to my little intro. Thank you for listening.